Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us here on this Friday evening here in Little Rock, Arkansas. And thanks to everyone who's joining us from all other places around the country and even around the world, I hope. Welcome to the virtual Six Bridges Book Festival. This is typically a live event that we host in April, but this year being what this year is, we're doing it virtually and a little bit late this year, but we're so glad to have you with us this evening. Since it's virtual, it means we can have so many people join us tonight. So I'm very glad to welcome all of you with us here this evening. So I'm super excited about this session. It's one of, maybe I'm biased, but I will say it's the coolest session that we have this year. I'm not cool, but I'm glad to get to be a part of it. So I'll introduce myself really quickly. My name's Amy Bradley Hull. I've been with the Book Fest for, over 10 years now. I love it. I love books. I love authors. I love talking to authors about their books. So we're going to have a great conversation this evening. But enough about me. I want to say really quickly, though, a special thank you to our sponsor for this session this evening, ProSmart Printing. So thanks to them, all of our sponsors for the fest make this happen and help us get all of these amazing authors. Speaking of amazing authors, we have tonight with us Dan Piepenbring and Anthony Boza. Dan Piepenbring was the editor of the Paris Review Daily, and he currently writes for The New Yorker. He's also co-written a book called Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. But tonight we're here to discuss this book, The Beautiful Ones. It was, in a roundabout way, to be Prince's memoir. Dan began working on it with Prince just a few months before Prince, tragically passed away very unexpectedly. But rather than let the book die with him, Dan used notes from his interviews. He used Prince's own writing and notes and a lot of really cool memorabilia to make this book happen. This book is just, it's so incredibly special. It's a stunning and really stirring homage to the Purple One, and anybody who's a Prince fan, funk fan, music fan, period, needs to own this. Anthony Boza is also with us. He started his career as an intern at Rolling Stone magazine, and over the 7 years that he worked there, he wrote numerous features on a wide variety of artists. While there, he wrote the 1999 cover story about the debut album of this weird character called Slim Shady. And over the years, he continued to work with Eminem in his capacity at the magazine. And this work eventually turned into his first book, which is called Whatever You Say I Am, The Life and Times of Eminem. And since then, he's written a book about many different artists, from NXS to Slash to AC/DC. But his newest book, right here, it's called Not Afraid, The Evolution of Eminem. So it kind of picks up where the first one left off in a way. This book, while his first book, Whatever You Say I Am, kind of explored, the origin of Eminem, Slim Shady, and kind of his backstory, this book tells us a little bit more about him since he kind of dropped off the public radar, ended up going to rehab, relapsing, and then eventually recovering kind of up until the present day. So guys, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I'm really excited to have y'all. And I'd like to kick things off by just asking you each to read a little bit from your books for us. So Dan, since I started the introduction with you, I'll go ahead and start with you. So if you don't mind, please go ahead and take the stage.
Sure. So happy to be here. I wish we were all in person, as I do love Little Rock. I was last there in 2015 when my punk band actually played a show in someone's house in Little Rock.
How cool. Oh, I did not know you've been here. That is so cool.
And as I recall, the house was kind of structurally unsound. There was a hole in the living room through which you could see into the basement. And then in the kitchen, there was a watermelon covered in ants, I remember. So it was a really nice kind of scummy punk house. And it was like one of the best shows on our tour. People really loved it. So
well, you have to all come
that
back
is yeah, it's a roundabout way of saying I love Little Rock. I'm going to read a bit from my introduction to the book. I'm actually reading the excerpt of it that was in the New Yorker. And I'm going to pick up right with my first meeting with Prince. Around 6 p.m., Kim Pratt, Prince's driver, texted to say that she was picking me up from the hotel. P, as many people in the Paisley sphere called him, was ready to see me. The sun had set, and Paisley, a vast network of squat buildings, including 3 recording studios paneled in white aluminum like an office park, was illuminated by purple sconces. He's really sweet, you'll see, Pratt said. Actually, it looks like you'll see right now, that's him. Prince was standing alone at the front door. Dan, nice to meet you, he said as I approached. I'm Prince. His voice was calm and lower than I'd expected. In the foyer, the lights were dim, and the silence was broken only by cooing doves, live ones, in a cage on the second floor. Scented candles flickered from the corners. Prince was wearing a loose-fitting top and a heathered sienna with matching pants, a green vest, and a pair of beaded necklaces. His afro was concealed beneath an olive green knit hat. His sneakers, white platforms with light-up lucite heels, flashed red as he led me up a flight of stairs and across a small skyway to a conference room. Are you hungry? He asked. No, I'm okay, I said, though I hadn't eaten since morning. Too bad, Prince said, I'm starving. In the conference room, his trademark glyph was etched into a long glass table. Toward the back, a fern sat beside 2 small sofas arranged in the shape of a heart. On the vaulted ceiling, a mural depicted a purple nebula bordered by piano keys. Prince took his place at the head of the table. Sit here, he said, gesturing to the chair next to him. He seemed accustomed to choreographing the space around him. Prince asked whether I had a copy of the personal statement I had written for him. He wanted to go over it together. I didn't have it, I said, but I could read it from my email. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, fearing that I was already in over my head. I cleared my throat and began, when I listen to Prince, I feel like I'm breaking the law. Now, let me stop you right there, Prince said. Why did you write that? It occurred to me that he might have flown me in from New York just to tell me that I knew nothing of his work. The music I make isn't breaking the law to me, he said. I write in harmony. I've always lived in harmony, like this. He gestured at the room. The candles, he said. He asked if I've heard of the devil's interval, the tritone, a combination of notes that create a brooding, menacing dissonance. He associated it with Led Zeppelin. Their kind of rock music, bluesy and harsh, broke the rules of harmony. Robert Plant's keening voice, that had sounded law-breaking to him as a child, not the music that he and his friends made. Behind his sphinx-like features, I could sense there was an air of skepticism. I tried to calm my nerves by making as much eye contact as possible. Though his face was unlined and his skin glowed, there was a fleeting glassiness in his eyes. We spoke about diction. Certain words don't describe me, he said. White critics had bandied about terms that demonstrated a lack of awareness of who he was. Alchemy was one. When writers ascribed alchemical qualities to his music, they were ignoring the literal meaning of the word, the dark art of turning base metal into gold. He would never do something like that. He reserved a special disdain for the word magical. I'd used some version of it in my statement. Funk is the opposite of magic, he said. Funk is about rules. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. All right, Anthony, your turn. You are up.
Okay, well, again, thanks for having me. I haven't been to Little Rock, and I was actually looking forward to it. But it's been pretty fun getting to know you guys on the screen the last couple days.
You're going to have to fix that soon. Promise us you'll come sometime.
I most certainly will. Okay, I've sort of just cut some pieces up from my introduction, which is titled The Storm, October 10th, 2017. It was in every way your average day modern awards show. Prevailing favorites won their categories, and the nominee lists were slightly off, embodying both the paying public's tastes and the media's self-congratulatory ones. That said, since its debut in 2006, the BET Hip Hop Awards has remained one of the better shows out there for a few reasons. It focused on one genre, it is in step and tied to a dedicated culture, and it remains conscious of the music's history. At a time when a sea of facially tattooed, rainbow dreadlocked, lil young rappers sipping lean and dropping Xanax made their way off of SoundCloud and onto the Billboard charts, it was refreshing to see a mainstream outlet like BET continuing to honor the pillars of hip hop. Each year at the Hip Hop Awards, the Cypher series follows this tradition, allowing emerging and underground artists to deliver bars alongside established stars. The Cyphers are divided into groups with 10 to 15 rappers participating, and the footage is screened throughout the show. The 2017 awards featured a round of ciphers with artists like Black, Fat Joe, Belly, Conway, and more. Those were great, but then they aired a cipher that stood out from the regularly scheduled programming. It was just one rapper, a cappella, with no beats and no DJ. You couldn't even call it a cipher. It was a one-sided battle rap between Eminem and an absent opponent, Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, a man who spits more lies in a week than a rapper with his first platinum chain but no record deal. Stalking an invisible opponent, pacing in an invisible ring, his hood up, his hands punctuating his words, Marshall Mathers' bold-eyed aggression burned a hole in the camera. This was more than a battle rap. It was a true freestyle, made up on the spot off the top of his head for 4 straight minutes. He started and stopped, changing rhyme schemes to emphasize each verse's message, all of them painting a picture of just how terrible and dangerous Donald Trump is to America and the world. It had been 15 years since I was inspired to think deeply about Eminem's significance as an artist, a figure, and a mirror of American culture. But when I saw him perform The Storm, fully engaged, righteously angry, and honestly letting fly at Trump from the top of his head with a full round of oral ammo, I was energized. In that moment, I knew that he is still a concentrated filter of our times. He never lost his talent, but he had lost his closest friend, his way, and nearly his life. He had been through so much, and though he'd already come back, so to speak, this performance was his real return. I saw a new man, not perfect, not trying to be, but no longer a boy. I saw someone who cared enough about his country to use the leverage he had to make a statement that could not be ignored, denied, or misinterpreted. I saw a man who had survived his upbringing and the rocket ship ride to success that I witnessed firsthand back in 1999. This was him not giving a fuck, but all grown up. His skills were sharp, his perception was clear, and his message that night was sent from the source, biting, bold, and heavy as a winter Detroit sky. That's
Thank
it.
you. Well done,
I didn't know how much I should do.
No, that was perfect. Absolutely perfect. No, I mean, if I had my way, I'd get you to sit here and read the whole book to us, but we're not going to
lose my voice.
However, though, I do want to say, so yeah, it's not too long though. It's good. But so guys, and when I say guys here, I'm just kind of speaking to the audience. I want y'all to know that this is Friday night. We're keeping it pretty casual. We're going to sit here and have a great conversation, but I want you to be a part of this conversation with us. So I've got some questions for these authors. We're just going to kind of chat and, shoot the breeze for a little while, but I want you to be a part of it. That's where your chat section comes in here on Zoom. If you want to ask questions, pop them in the chat. I'll make sure to kind of watch the feed there and see what comes up, and we'll ask the guys and everything. So please, by all means, feel free to kind of virtually interrupt by asking some questions in the chat there. So we can kind of, whatever you're interested in, these guys are willing to talk about it, and we'll kind of cover some really interesting stuff here. But I want to kick things off, though. Memoirs, biographies, they're a different beast than other books. You're not writing it on your own. You're writing it, often with someone who is there and is present in one way or another. And so it's a little bit different kind of crafting that than what most writers have to deal with. So I want to ask you each separately kind of about the process here. So Dan, I'll start with you. You were handpicked by Prince to work with him on his memoir that he was going to write. You spent some time with him in person at Paisley Park. You got to go to some of his tour stops, I think specifically in Australia. And you also got to watch him perform in some really intimate settings. Things were going very well between the two of you. You're starting to kind of get into a groove and work on this. And then barely 3 months after you started, kind of such a short time after you started, we all know what happened. When it hit the news, I remember where I was, and we learned out that Prince had passed away. So I'd love for you to kind of tell us just a little bit about how you got involved with Prince and the project in the first place. But then I'm also really interested in, what is it like trying to piece together the memoir of someone that you really kind of, maybe not barely knew, but we're just kind of getting to know under those circumstances. So.
Yeah, it was such a long and winding road. I remember first hearing about the Prince memoir in, I guess, late 2015. My literary agent kind of let it drop that his firm was representing Prince and that he was probably going to try to write a memoir. And he said this to me knowing full well that I was a Prince obsessive. So I think we were at a bar somewhere and I reached across the table and grabbed him by the lapels, as one does, and said, like, I need to be in the running for this. And he very generously agreed to put me on the list, but he did not mince words. He was like, you're not going to get this job. You've written 0 books. You're a 29-year-old white dude who lives in New York, and odds are Prince is going to want a writer who is some combination of a woman, a person of color, or someone from Minneapolis. So I really didn't check any of the boxes. As it happened, Prince returned the long list of potential writers that he had received, and he had crossed off everyone who had written a book before. So he actually wanted someone completely untested. And I write about this in the introduction. And because the literary agents hadn't really anticipated that, there weren't many of us on that list who hadn't written books. I think it came down to me and 1 or 2 others. And we had the kind of daunting task of writing a personal statement for him, which I did very quickly that same day, knowing that Prince was not someone who liked to wait. So I sent something in, I believe, that same night. And by 5 a.m. the next morning, I had heard that he had read the statement and wanted me to meet him in Minneapolis, which is sort of where that bit that I just read came from. So yeah, I think it all plays on his he was just impossible to predict, of course. And I think in looking for a collaborator, he very meaningfully wanted to deviate from whatever the expectations around that would be. And so he chose me. And I think there's a bit of trolling in that, to be honest. There's a bit of that Prince mischief. He always liked to keep people guessing. And I think choosing someone like me who did not fit the bill at all was another way for him to tell the world that they couldn't or shouldn't deign to predict what he would do next. As for the second question, I mean, that after he died, it seemed for the longest time that this book was not going to happen. And that's very understandable. He had died without a will. His estate was in a kind of chaos. And we only had a series of less than 30 pages that he and I had worked on together, that he had written and that we had gone through together. But I had those pages in my possession, those handwritten pages, and I kept rereading them. And because he had announced the book, I was hearing from fans all the time begging me to know what he had written. And they really did, because they started from his first memory, set the stage for a story about his life, or of his life, that would set the record straight, I guess, in some ways, or at least offer people an insight into him that they maybe hadn't had before. And I knew he was proud of those pages. He'd read them aloud to friends of his, and he had told me that he really liked what he had written and wanted to keep going. So I just wanted, if there was any way to get them into the world, I thought we had to do that. And of course, it wouldn't be very princely to just release like a PDF or something of those memoir pages. So we started talking to the estate and figuring out a way that we could use his personal archives to try and complete the book as he and I had discussed. And I didn't really want to finish it. It's very purposely unfinished. I didn't put any words in his mouth. I wasn't about to write in his voice. But I thought the story of our conversations, when he had been so full of energy and vivacity and had had so many really unexpected and far-ranging ideas about what the book could be, I thought there was so much hope in those conversations and so much that people would learn about him from them. So I figured that that could constitute a part of the book. I think anyone who's ever written a book knows that there's this point toward the very beginning when you're full of potential energy, and there's a time when it seems like your book can encapsulate all possible things. And it's a really beautiful time because you think like, I could really have something special here. And in the months that I had with Prince, he was very much in that frame of mind. I mean, he was so excited about just the possibilities for the book, and that led him in some really spectacular and unexpected directions. So following through was primarily a matter of preserving his elliptical qualities and also capturing that energy that he had felt about what a memoir could be. And that was kind of the guiding light as we moved through the process.
Well, you didn't specifically bring this up. Well, you brought up about the notes that he had written. But what you didn't mention is after he passed away, you were allowed to kind of go into the archive, so to speak, and dig up photo albums and find lyrics that he wrote on paper bags and that kind of stuff. And guys, this is not going to do it justice, of course, being on this screen. But what I want you to understand about this book is, so it's fairly small, but it might as well be a coffee table book. First of all, it's super heavy, like high quality. Is that intentional? Like, why is this thing so heavy? Is it the paper or something like that? But it is, there's a little bit of writing and everything, but then we get into, when he was talking about Prince's handwritten notes, I want you to realize that Prince's handwritten notes are in this book. Okay. Pictures from his old photo albums with his notes that he wrote in the scrapbook, notes that he made about music and stuff like that. This is incredible. This kind of goes so far beyond just writing about a man or sharing his own words. Like you said, you were able to capture the essence of him because you had access to all of this material. So even though he was gone, you still kind of probably felt his physical presence very much, I would think, when you were at Paisley Park. Am I correct there? Or?
Absolutely. And it helped because he had set out for me and for my editor, Chris Jackson, almost a series of watchwords that would make things almost light up when we encountered them at Paisley Park. He really wanted to write about his parents. He loved his mother and his father. He felt that the treatment of them in Purple Rain had been a bit reductive, and that neither of them had really gotten their due in terms of how much they had influenced him. And he loved his community. He loved North Minneapolis, where he was born and raised, and the kind of musical and competitive energy that he drew on, and that made him this prodigious musician. And he loved just anything that kind of spoke to his singularity and his mystery, which he intentionally did not want to puncture. He wanted to remain mysterious. And I mean, I think he could have written a 1,000-page book, and at the end he would still be mysterious. That was just
probably right,
who he is. But yeah, there would be things in the archive that just sort of lit up with meaning, because we knew what had been on his mind. So things like those scrapbooks and photos of his mother and father that he had kept, a poster from his father's old jazz band, or sheet music that his father had written. Things like that had been very carefully stored and left aside, and immediately just jumped out at us. So in a way, it was like he was there kind of pointing at things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's incredibly special to be able to see. I'm a big believer in audiobooks and that kind of stuff. You can't do this on book. You got to have this book to be able to look at it. Okay, Anthony, I'm going to go to you now. So you're kind of the opposite of what Dan experienced, with only having a short amount of time with Prince. You actually know Eminem / Marshall Mathers quite well, right? I mean, you've spent many years talking with them and getting to know some of the deeper details of his life. And that really, really shows in your book. I mean, this book it's more like just kind of listening in to personal conversations between two friends than it is just kind of reading sterile details about somebody. So you can very much tell in these pages that there's, a connection there, and that you know what you're talking about when you're talking about him. So kind of tell me the same thing. What was it like kind of starting to do this book, working with him? What was the writing process like for you?
Well, thank you for the kind words. I have known him since '99, and through sort of all his various phases. This book was very different than the first one in many ways. The first one was really how did this juggernaut that is Eminem and Marshall Mathers come to be? What are the influences that sort of came together to make him the most important artist, like, of the era, around 2003 when the first book came out. He's a very different person now. He was a lot more open then. This is a very sort of different take, and a different, it's another 15 years of his career covered in this book, roughly. And they were tough ones. He's a different guy. He's not as fun anymore. He's much more private. So this process was very different.
Yeah.
He really there is trust. I get along with the camp, and I had access to him, but it certainly wasn't the way it was in the beginning, when life has really changed him. He's sober. He's completely sober. He overdosed on drugs twice. He nearly died. He lost his best friend. He was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
He's been divorced, remarried, re-divorced. It's just he's a different guy. So this book was different. And the one thing that really was clear when I was speaking with him is that he has become very savvy, even with somebody who's known him and interviewed him in a very casual way, in a very friendly way. He's really knows how to hold back things and just present exactly what he wants to be said. So that was different from the very beginning. So the thing that I did to get a more intimate tone to the book was talk to his closest friends, and they gave me free reign to do that. And that was kind of my idea, because especially with someone dealing with addiction and all the stuff he's been through, he gave me what I needed, but I could really tell that he didn't want to get into it. But if you know anyone who's battled with substance abuse,
mm-hmm.
It takes a huge toll on the people closest to them. So I thought that the best way to really get an intimate picture of what was going on with him, and in every way, like mentally, in terms of his substances and everything, was to talk to the people closest to him. So that's what this kind of focus was. And I also, the sort of darker period for him wasn't really celebrated in the media as much, and wasn't taken as seriously in terms of the music. So I really thought it was important to give a lot of those albums that are great. Some of them he doesn't even like, because he was, now that he's sober, he looks back and was like, I was on drugs, this is stupid. But it's really not. It's still good. I mean, it's silly.
It's still amazing.
It's a lot of silliness, but So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was a very different focus, and even midway through the process, it's certainly nothing like what Dan was dealing with, but midway through the process, when he had the album called Revival in 2017, he absolutely couldn't stand the sort of media backlash that he got, so much so that he really started to limit how much he wanted to work on this. He just stopped all interviews. He doesn't do any more interviews with major media outlets. That's been the rule in that camp
not at all, nothing.
Yeah. No, anything he's done since 2017, he'll do extensive video interview with someone who works for his media company, and then they edit it and put it on YouTube. So he was, even with me, he was pretty guarded. He had just sort of had it with all that, which was a bit of a challenge too. But that's why it was great to talk to, Denon Porter and all of his closest friends who are really open about watching their friends suffer. And even with those people who have, Denon has been his best friend since he was 16, just saying how closed off he was becoming with the drugs and everything like that. It was, that stuff was, I would say, the most telling bits of the book. Like I said, just because he's guarded and not as much fun, but he's still a genius and we love him.
Yes, he absolutely still is a genius. I mean, I can get that though, when you kind of go through something like that, and especially when you have become sober and you look back at everything that you did and said and that kind of thing, you do kind of want to protect yourself. He's got to protect his sobriety because he's very committed to it, right? Yeah, I mean, he wants to protect that. That's a big deal, and you want to protect that, and it feels good, and you don't want to do anything to ruin that. And sometimes just putting yourself out there too publicly can be what drags all these issues back up. And that kind of leads me to my next thing that I wanted to talk about. Anthony, you wrote about this in the beginning of your book, just kind of in general, the role that social media plays today with music artists, famous people in general. It's just it has a huge role. It's how people promote stuff. I mean, I know also from an author's point of view, I've interviewed enough authors and talked to enough authors to hear this, and it's they want authors these days to have a huge following before they'll even kind of give them a book deal thing, because social media is everything, and that's how you market and publicize. And so it's especially important for musical artists too. It's how they connect with fans. The more connected you feel with a fan, the more the fans are connected to you, the more they're going to want to spend money on you and follow you. But it also kind of, and you really hit on this, Anthony, it gives people a false sense of intimacy, and it makes them think that they're friends with this famous person, or that they know them really well. But like you said, Emma's super private these days. We know Prince was the same way. I mean, he wasn't, he put in his lyrics lots of really intimate, explicit stuff, but he wasn't necessarily like that as a person. And they kind of avoided that life completely. But at the same time, these memoirs show that both of these men, obviously, they want to be heard. They want to be known in a different way than just through their lyrics, their movies, what they've done. So did you feel any kind of responsibility as an author, both of you guys, to kind of help them balance their need for privacy with the need to kind of put it all out there in a book? We'll throw it to either one of you.
Well, I mean, I'll go. I mean, the thing with social media, Prince was fantastic at maintaining mystery, like we've said. And I think that for a celebrity is it's a very valuable commodity. I certainly liked it better growing up when there wasn't all this access, and you could kind of imagine what your favorite musical artist or whoever, actor, whatever you like. It was more fun to engage your imagination, especially with music. I like just having the music and the lyrics and let my mind kind of do the rest and come up with a scenario about what they're like. I think too often those lovely little bubbles get burst. And, social media it's more than just, it does give people this false sense of access, but I think to the artists, it's also this responsibility that they also kind of have to do this, and they're really never getting any kind of privacy. And it really does take a psychological toll. Like Eminem, as much as he doesn't engage in social media, he reads it. The kid is really sensitive, and he takes it very seriously, and he's yelled at people. When he first started to get into it, he tried to avoid it, but he's getting so angry about people that do these review videos on YouTube where they review the record, and they act like they're in a pro office. It's kind of funny stuff, and they just no disrespect, but they just kind of go review the record. And that's why he did Kamikaze. He just put out this album with no fanfare, like no announcement, and he was just so angry at people like that he started making fun of them and going for it. So he does read that stuff, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you're a sensitive person and creative, you're going to probably read some reviews. And now there's just so many that people can just throw stuff out at the internet, and then they're more bold about doing it too. So it's just it's a bad situation. I think for the creative soul.
So like on his Twitter feed, is that actually him or no? Because his Twitter feed is so sterile, but like, is that actually him?
Yeah, he does, and he does his Instagram. It's occasionally, his Twitter feed is definitely him. They have, it is him. Okay. And sometimes, he'll post Instagram things that are funny. It's just like him playing Miss Pac-Man in his house. like he started doing Instagram, and that's what he was doing. Or he did this thing that I thought was hilarious, where he kept taking pictures, but it was like half of his face and like half of the famous person.
He's the worst at selfies.
He's doing it on purpose.
Okay, that's
he's doing it on purpose. Like that's.
I was wondering if that was a thing.
Yeah, that was on purpose. So,
funnily enough, his daughter, Haley, who, of course, if anybody who's listened to Eminem since the beginning knows, how we feel like she almost kind of grew up with us in ways that, she is all over Instagram. Like, she's probably considered an influencer. And, she's just
she is.
She loves it. I have to imagine that.
Generational. It's generational.
As a parent of someone who's about that age too, I imagine he's probably just like, oh my gosh, the whole time. But
Well, anyway. All things considered, she turned out to be like a very lovely young woman. She went to school. She got a degree in psychology. I was like, smart. You just unpack all these issues. Yeah. And she, I think she married her college sweetheart, and they live in a house
she's absolutely
not far
adorable.
from Eminem. Yeah. And they're just, it doesn't have any, she's not running around getting into trouble. So more the likelihood of that, you know.
Like, kudos to her. All right, so Dan, kind of same thing to you. I mean, like, what was the privacy public balance there? I mean, and maybe a little bit of background on Prince's feeling about the media in general and that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, as you guys were talking, it occurred to me how much Eminem and Prince have in common in this way, actually. Both very precocious talents who came up out of the Midwest, and both, I think, crucially, at the center of these moral panics very early in their career. Prince with Tipper Gore and the kerfuffle over explicit lyrics and everything in the mid 80s, and then Eminem, of course, in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I think they both saw how totally misconstrued their work was in the hands of these conservative critics, for the most part, these family values types who really made them straw men for some kind of argument about the ideal American life that neither of them wanted any part of. And I think that and the combination of the media kind of coming from the coasts and trying to invade these very different Midwestern places where they had been raised, I think both of them learned very early on to be guarded about that. And it really set the tone for the rest of their careers. And that was definitely true with Prince. He also went through long periods where he did no interviews at all. And he had a famously vexed relationship with the internet. He gave an interview, I think, in the late 2000s where he said the internet is totally over, or maybe it was even later than that. But then he did eventually appear on Twitter and Instagram and seemed to have a lot of fun with it. His Twitter use especially was kind of subversive to me. He would, instead of retweeting people the way anyone would, clicking the retweet button, he would copy and paste the message of their tweet and then like add their handle at the end. And so people often thought that he was saying things that he was quoting. He would also tweet stuff and delete it within minutes or sometimes hours. So you really had to see it or it would be gone. And he would tweet kind of cryptic stuff, pictures of his friends' paintings and pictures of old movie stars like Edward G. Robinson, who he really liked. And he just seemed to have a lot of fun with it. But I think it was because he had arrived at a place where he was fully in control of it, and he knew that he was only giving what he wanted to give. In terms of my work with him, I do think people were shocked when he said he was going to write a memoir. It was the last thing I think anyone ever expected Prince to do. And he wanted to capitalize on that. And as I said, he was aware of his persona being this mysterious thing. He knew how to stoke the flames of interest in the public and how to pull back the veil a little bit without showing too much. And so that was really the least of my worries. I just knew that he was so on top of that I didn't think he was going to let anything slide.
I was worried, kind of control everything.
Yeah. I mean, the fear would be, and this may well have been realized had we gone far enough into the process, that there would come a time where I really needed him to put something on the page or reveal something or open up, and he just wasn't going to go there. About the death of his child, for instance, or the dissolution of his marriages, or any number of things that he would probably not want to talk about. But I do think he saw that if there was one way to get his story right in the eyes of the world, he felt that music journalists had mangled it so much that there was a lot to be accomplished by just coming out and saying it himself. And I think he was very forthright in what he wrote while maintaining a sense of play. So yeah, I think he and Eminem alike have both really faced these bizarre challenges from celebrity, the likes of which few others have encountered. And I do think to some degree goes back to this moral panic thing. I think that really is a strange commonality they have.
Yeah. Well, speaking of commonalities, throwing a little trivia for people here. And also kind of along the same lines of kind of being very out there and very public. Both of these guys in the very early stages of their career made movies that were super integral, very important of them becoming who they were. And both of the movies were not word for word their life story, but their life story. And the trivia, they both won Oscars for it too.
Yeah.
But so obviously there was, these are two people who are not afraid to put their history out there. because
Mhm.
they both did it kind of, like I said, very early on with their movies. So, got a question here from the audience from Susan, and Dan, it's for you. She said, tell me about what you felt and how you dealt with the immediate time after Prince's death.
Oh, great question. I write about this a bit in the book. I heard about his death in the kind of worst place, which was on a Metro North commuter train heading out of New York City, surrounded by, very stodgy business types and sitting on like an uncomfortable vinyl seat. So I was totally gobsmacked. I had just talked to him, I think 4 days before he died. And I had heard about his plane landing early and everything, but I fully thought that he was okay because he had told me that he was. Fortunately, I had a very good friend with me, and she and I could just kind of digest it and cry together. And I just remember catching a ton of weird looks from passengers on this train because I was really freaking out, and no one could really understand why. And as I mentioned earlier, I had these physical pages of his, these handwritten pages in my possession, and they immediately became so valuable to me. I started having nightmares about them. I thought about like getting a safe or something to put them in, because they suddenly seemed like this almost sacred object, although he definitely wouldn't want me calling them sacred. That would be sacrilegious. So substitute a word of your choice. Very important. And yes, priceless. Perfect. Good. I wondered how I was going to be able to synthesize this time that I had spent with him into something meaningful, because I really didn't think that the book could ever happen in that way. And I just remember being barraged with media requests and ignoring all of them, and really thinking that I was going to have to spend a lot of time alone and actually reckon with what had happened before I could even begin to try and put the pieces together. So after the shock and the sadness, there was just this kind of absence, and I felt a little silly about it because I didn't know him well. I would never say we were good friends or anything like that, but our time together had meant so much to me that it had taken on this additional importance. And I just started listening to his music, and that's really what led me to the book, was just going back into his discography and reconnecting with him as a fan.
I don't think that's silly at all. I mean, I cried. I know lots of people cried. And that's what we did. We listened to his music.
Yeah.
So I've gotten a text question from a friend of mine, from Jess. And I'm going to read you the first part of this question, and I'll have a little comments, and then I'll come back to the question. She says, you may not want to get political, but we'll come to the question here, because I want to kind of throw in a little background. So Eminem has been, fairly outspoken, especially in the past few years, about some political stuff. Prince was less so. You do, Dan, you do talk in the book, in the beginning of the book, about some of his views on racism and about the way he felt like the music industry kind of treated people of color. He did make a couple of public comments about race issues. I mean, I think, if I recall, wasn't it a Grammys award ceremony where maybe when he accepted his award, he said Black Lives Matter or something like that? And some of his songs had some pretty overt political messages. I mean, Sign of the Times, one of them. But overall, he kind of stayed out of the fray. Not so much the case with Eminem, which we'll come back to with this question. But this question does kind of make me curious, because her question is specifically kind of regarding Anthony and Eminem, but it does make me curious about something that I'd like you to comment on, Dan. Do you think that if Prince were still alive now, he, knowing everything that's going on right now with, coronavirus, racial issues, riots, the election, all that kind of stuff, do you think he would kind of be more publicly speaking? And I know this is complete conjecture, and if you want to say I don't want to assume, then you are more than welcome to do that. But do you think he'd be saying something? Do you think he'd be involved in any of this and that kind of stuff? Or
I think he actually already was, to a large extent. In his last years, he had this real political awareness, this kind of political rebirth. He was a huge proponent of Black Lives Matter. Not only did he mention it at those award shows, but he also played a show in Baltimore after Freddie Gray was murdered by police.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And he wrote a song called Baltimore. And he really wanted his book to serve, as he called it, as a handbook for the Black community and for Black creators about how to own their recordings, how to serve as kind of the lodestars of their community, and how to transform their art into a kind of political vehicle. So yeah, he definitely would have been active. It breaks my heart that he did not live to see this past summer. I mean, I think it would have broken his heart too to see George Floyd die. But I know that in the terrible aftermath of that, when people were taking the streets, I think he would have been there. And I don't know what he would have done, but I think he would have done something grand, and he would have had the right gesture for that moment. And it could have really unified people. And I thought of him right away when I heard the news about George Floyd. As I saw everything happening there, because that really was exactly what was on his mind in his final years. And he had been to the Obama White House too. He played there, and I think he told Obama that he didn't vote for him because he just didn't vote, period. And Obama still loved him. And I gotta say, that how many people could really pull that off?
Well, I mean, who wouldn't love Prince? But
I know.
That seems so much more in keeping with him. It's just being kind of apolitical and wouldn't vote and that kind of thing. I can kind of understand that side of him. So yeah, I mean, but like you mentioned, I was saying, I mean, it's not like he avoided it completely. He was.
Yeah, I do think he had taken some flack for that over the course of his career, and at various times had been accused, sometimes really understandably, of turning away from the Black community and forgetting his roots and everything, and of only identifying as Black when it was convenient for him. And I think he was really reconsidering a lot of things he had done over his career and was trying to make amends in those last years. And I think it was really improving his music too. I think on that last album, especially Hit and Run Phase 2, there is, it's a kind of throwback album to the 70s sound of his youth, a lot of debt to Shaka Khan and Rufus especially, who he loved. And there is an infusion of a kind of political rhetoric there and a thoughtfulness about his past that I don't think we had really seen before. And I'm just sad we don't get to see where that would have gone.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have heard his voice with all that. So, okay, so that kind of gets me back to the question here. Like I said, Anthony, Eminem has no problem letting us kind of know how he feels, especially in the recent years, about Donald Trump specifically. You mentioned that and what you read. So for anyone who hasn't kind of listened to some of his lyrics on some of those Donald Trump diss tracks, for lack of a better term, I say listen to him. So the question from Jess was, maybe you don't want to get political, but she said, can we expect a campaign speech part 2 in the next couple of weeks? So just kind of set it up again, if you don't know, just before the last election. I mean, honestly, like a few days, right? I mean, it wasn't long before the election. He put out, I don't even want to call it a song. I mean, it was kind of almost more spoken word. I don't know, but it was called Campaign Speech. And I mean, he just ripped into Trump and the political process and all that kind of stuff. So do you think we're going to get a campaign speech part 2 this year?
I mean,
is it going to be an election year special again?
I would, I don't know. I don't have any insider info on this one. Most of the people that work for him don't even know when he's going to drop something anymore. That's how he's really playing it. I hope so. And because some of that stuff, he adopted that, for lack of a better word, it's almost like post-rap rhyme structure. After he didn't really like, he after criticism for some of his style on Revival, that album, he did do these things that are really closer to spoken word, because there is a rhythm to it, but it's in his head and it's not a traditional sort of poetry beat in any way, shape, or form. And he did do that. He likes this like rapid fire off the top of his head railing against Donald Trump. So I think he probably will. He's really learned from not saying anything and just putting product out. The last time he did any kind of lead up to it was Revival.
That was kind of a hot mess. I mean,
it was
talked about it in the book, but it wasn't, it wasn't the most cohesive marketing plan. Yeah.
Exactly. There was, this fake drug campaign and these ads on television that looked like, the late night ads that you see for the antidepressants and things like that.
Yeah.
Complete with a website that you would go to and just a lot of sort of slim shady jokes and yucks and stuff like that. And then, the album it looked like it was going to be entirely political. There was Eminem with his head in his hands, the American flag sort of over it. And it really isn't. He sort of tried to, I think, play to all of his audiences. There's pop numbers. There's really like hardcore street rap stuff. There is like 2 political songs. One's like about race. One is, about the president. And it was kind of panned and people didn't really like it. So he really, has gone back to just doing what he wants when he wants, no announcement, and just putting it out there. And since then he's had, 3 number one records. And so I guess to answer the question, I'm hoping for it. Why not? It sort of gets me like, it just like gets me juvenile fired up to like, I still like.
It's like one of the hype videos for a football game. It's kind of the same thing. Yeah.
It is. And I'll always be blown away by his wordsmithery, if you will, just his ability to bend language around ways that it's not supposed to go.
Genius. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
the interlocking rhyme schemes are crazy. Like if you there's sites that map it out and stuff. It's crazy. Like what's
I was an English major and English teacher. My emphasis of my degree was on linguistics, and so I studied this deeply. And when I hear him, I think that's one of the reasons I love him so much. Even when the stuff he says just appalls me, I'm like, oh my gosh, to even consider being that talented. So. Yeah, that's cool. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Let's hope for it. We're getting close. I mean, gosh, there's a lot of fodder now. I mean, if we thought he did in 2017, forget about it. It's going to be
he might have had something kind of written and ready to go last week, and the way things change these days, he's had to scrap it and start anew. So
it's going to be a 45-minute freestyle. Yes, encompass 2020 alone.
Yeah, I won't argue with that. So, all right, we got another question for the audience, and since we're almost at watershed hour, there's no kids listening, we can go here. So, Brad says both artists are very sexual beings. Yes, they are. And on a personal note, I will say I used to joke and tell people everything that I learned about sex growing up, I learned from Prince and Madonna. My parents didn't talk about it much, but I listened to a lot of Prince and Madonna, and they talked about it all the time. And then M in his own way, I mean, he talks about a lot of sexual stuff. It might not be things that we consider necessarily sexy. But
there's a lot of darkness and confusion.
Yeah, but he goes there.
Aging Dr. Freud. There's a lot of stuff going on there.
Woo! I will say though that I do think older brunette Marshall Mathers is hot as hell. I mean,
I'll let him know.
Please do, because
he's a handsome guy.
My gosh, I'm so glad he lost that blonde hair and that kind of stuff. Like the picture on the cover of the book and some of the stuff in the sheet, I'm like, oh geez, I'm fanning myself a little bit here. So Brad says, so both artists are very sexual beings. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of them and their work, and maybe some misconceptions that people have about them when it comes to that arena, so to speak? So,
well, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Mine is so much work. There's so much complicated sexual politics. I have to think about that one. I don't know if I'd call Eminem's music sexy, but okay.
I mean, maybe if you listen to some of the instrumentals, they would be kind of sexy in their own way.
Imagine your own lyrics.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the first time I saw a Prince album. It was in a Walmart. This would have been in the late 90s when he was kind of persona non grata. He had changed his name to the Unpronounceable Symbol. He was the butt of a lot of late night jokes. And it was Rave Unto the Joy Fantastic in the Walmart. And he's wearing this kind of tight blue sparkling thing on it. He looks very effeminate. His hair is back in cornrows, I think, and is beaded. and he looks really otherworldly. There's an extraterrestrial, very sexy vibe. And being, I think, a 7th or 8th grader at that time, I was like, I was drawn enough to pick it up and be like, what is this? But then I didn't dream of buying it. Instead, I bought the edited version of the Slim Shady LP, in fact, today at Walmart, which I remember had a broken Vicodin pill on the compact disc, which also taught me a few things. But that's another story for another day.
That's one of them's first tattoos.
Yeah. I was like, what is this pill, Vico? What? But that is to say that like my first exposure to Prince was just as a weird, sexy thing, and I didn't really know what he was going for, and it did kind of scare me, being a straight male in middle school in this hormonal maelstrom, being like, well, that's weird, and that must be like bad, and I think that weirdness is now, of course, one of the things I treasure most about Prince, and his sexuality, of course, was totally unbridled in the 80s, especially. I think the way he's able to fuse that sexuality with a kind of holiness has always been one of the most fascinating things about his music. He really weds the sacred and the profane, as they say. And in a song like If I Was Your Girlfriend, especially off Sign of the Times, I think he gets so deep there, talking from the perspective of a man, but singing in not just a falsetto, but a falsetto that he's pitched up even more to really sound like a woman. So he sounds like a woman, but he's singing from the perspective of a man talking to his girlfriend, and he wishes that he were a woman so that he could be even closer to her than he is as her boyfriend. He wants to have that kind of bond that only two people of the same gender can have, I guess. That kind of camaraderie, or something more fraternal almost, or sororal. And I think that's just such a deep and beautiful and complex song that really, to me, captures the essence of sexually what makes Prince so special. But he did, by the time I was working with him, he would still play that song, but anything that had profanity in it or was explicitly sexy, he would sometimes shy away from. He wasn't saying fuck anymore, so that takes some of the catalog entries out. Darling Nikki wasn't going to happen anymore. So I think he was always wrestling with what it meant to have been that open in the 80s. And as he became a more religious person, his views on that were really complicated, and we never really got to talk about it. I know that when Vanity, his one of his first loves and a kind of protege of his, died, I was with him then, and he was really moved by her death, and I think that she had really represented some kind of someone really special for him, and that whatever his sexuality had, she was really vital part of that. So as with all things Prince, the mystery is intact, and any perspective you can claim that he had on it, it seems that at some point he also had the exact opposite one. So
which is not far from Eminem. You grow up, you change a little bit, you change your mind, that kind of stuff. So, but no, Anthony, now you get to talk about sex. So congratulations, you're up.
Yeah, I've never thought of Eminem's music as sexy ever. I understand that a lot of people think he's attractive, but if we're talking about the music, there's a lot of like conflicted sexual mores going on, and just this is a guy whose mother, they had a very complicated relationship, and then he has been with Kim since they were 15. It's sort of, to me, it's more just like kind of him trying to figure out all of these conflicted things. There's so much misogyny and just blatant.
I mean,
fantastic. Fantastic.
I told you before that
on.
Just makes one of the things that made me so uncomfortable with his music. I mean, I didn't want to I liked it, and I kind of bopped to it when I first started listening to it, and then I started listening to the words, and I was like, no, you can't do this shit. No, stop it. But I mean,
right. So I'm confused by the sexy thing when it comes to the music. But,
not necessarily sexy, but I mean, though he did. I mean, he talks about relationships, and like you said, he's got some really kind of messed up relationships with women in a lot of ways, and probably some confusion about the difference between love and sex and that kind of stuff. So
right. I mean, the situation with his mother, is very complicated. When I did my first article, her version of his childhood and his were so different that I got the legal department at Rolling Stone to agree to just let me put both versions side by side. It was the only way we could get it into print.
Yeah.
And I did that because they were just so drastically over, separated. And, she sued him over, slander for saying that, my mom does more drugs than I do and all that kind of stuff. So it's super complicated. And he obviously had this very complicated, often violent relationship with Kim, the mother of Haley. So that's where that comes from. The only thing can always, he's very different when you're hanging out with him. He's a pretty humble, genuine, kind of funny Midwestern kid. That's all I can really say about him. And he has remained that from the first day I met him to, today. He's just, like I said, a lot more guarded and things like that. But the thing that I always kind of look at is that, I remember when I first interviewed him, I asked him, do you think you'll ever go to therapy? Because of all the shit that happened.
You need it.
And he's like, that's not really my style. I just put it all in the music, and that's basically what he did. I mean, those first 3 albums, especially, it's, things have changed and now he's guarded and he doesn't talk about his home life anymore. And he didn't really like the effect it was having on his daughter. He just got to a point where he said, I'm not doing that. And I'm not talking about her ever on a record again. I think he regrets saying that stuff about her mom.
Yeah.
But we have that to look at, if anything, in terms of understanding how he feels about women truly. And if you look at how he raised his daughter, she turned out to be great. And there's a period of time, Kim has been in rehab. When they were separated, she had a child with another man who's, I believe, still in jail for cocaine trafficking. He adopted that daughter and raised her. He also adopted her younger sister. I think she's younger. Her sister, Dawn, who passed away, she was a meth addict. He adopted her daughter too. And so there was a time when he was, biggest rapper in the world, living at home, raising these 3 girls. And was totally a dad and is really good in the community and all that stuff. So, again, it's kind of a question of remembering that it's art, even if it's ugly. And a lot of what he's working out is that, and he's not sitting there, murdering his baby mama at home every night. Or
not in real life, just in music. So.
But I mean, sex in the Eminem world is certainly extremely complicated and mostly misogynistic and pretty ugly, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, we'll give him a pass. So, all right. So before we kind of wrap things up, I want to ask you a couple of kind of rapid fire questions here. So I always like to ask my authors what they're reading right now. So guys, what are you reading right now?
I just finished Nicholson Baker's latest book, which is about the CIA. And when I'm not writing about music, I tend to be writing about national security. Who would have thought? My other book was about the Manson murders. So Nicholson Baker, who's better known as a novelist, has written a great book about his experiences trying to extract information from the CIA using FOIA requests and how frustrating and kind of Sisyphean an effort that is. And he ties this into his suspicion, which he largely confirms, that the US was using biological weapons during the Korean War, which of course they've always said they didn't do. And he writes this all in the form of a diary, so that's also commingled with reflections on his 2 new dogs and his wife and the beauty of the springtime in Maine. So that juxtaposition makes it a really lively and kind of strange book. And I really love him.
I'm making a mental note of that. Anthony, what are you reading right now?
I just started Neil Gaiman's latest novel. I read a lot of
anything
fiction.
he writes. Listen, I've been some of the people involved with the Lit Fest, with the book fest, can tell you since I started with it, I've been trying to get him to come here. I'm a mega fan of his. So tell us about it.
It's what is it called? The lake at the end of the road, or the pond at the end of the road? I just started it. I'm a huge fan. So, it's a good sort of
fantastic.
Yeah, it's just sort of is that what it's called? Something at the end of the lane. I'm terrible, obviously. And kind of right now, I just want some escapism.
So I was like,
that's where
I've got a book today, and I was like, I need fantasy. I need like hardcore
Yeah.
fantasy right now. So I'm feeling you on that one. So all right. So like I said, I always ask authors what they're reading, but because it's y'all, I'm going to ask you an additional question to that. Tell me what you're listening to right now.
Ooh, wow.
What musicians are doing it for you?
Oh God, I mean, I'm drawing a blank. I have actually not listened to that much music like this past month, which is terrible to say. But you know, when I do, I've lately been in like more of a jazz phase, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been going back and listening, especially to like Wayne Shorter for whatever reason. Whenever I'm cooking dinner or after hours, I'll put on his stuff. I also have to say that I heard a car drive by today and play Hall & Oates' I Can't Go For That, No Can Do. And it brought a huge smile to my face. And I was like, shit, I gotta listen to that song. I haven't just put it on end to end in a while. And of course, I have to say, I'm listening to the Prince Sign of the Times deluxe reissue, which has such a bounty of material on it. It just came out a few weeks ago, and I still have not made my way through all of the live performances and bonus tracks in it. And that's really not a plug because I don't see any funds from that. But I'm gonna
check that out.
Yeah, they've remastered it, which sounds great. All the Prince records had never been properly remastered, so their mastering is still from the vinyl era, pretty much from the '80s anyway. And so to hear them as they should sound in 2020 is really amazing. So yeah, I put on Housequake the other day really loud, and that sounded very good.
Oh. All right, Anthony, we got a comment here. Said the name of the book is The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Nice, thank you.
So
I said the pond. What an idiot! It's like much bigger than that. It's Neil Gaiman. It's gonna be the hugest thing ever.
It's still just at the end of the lane, though.
I knew that. Yeah, quaintly at the end of the lane.
What are you listening to these days?
Well, I regularly make these mixes on Spotify. So I'm always, and they're really diverse. Like they're all over the map. They're generally kind of like weird, obscurities from the 60s and 70s, and then like a hip hop song, and then there's a lot of funk and a lot of new stuff. But
so I had to interrupt. Are you public on Spotify so we can follow you?
Yeah, you sure can.
I need one of these playlists. Okay.
Go ahead. There's like 60 of them. I've been doing it for a few years, and it's just what I'm like when I'm working or doing things that don't require utmost silence and concentration. That's sort of my soundtrack. But I'm very obsessed with the new Killers record, Putting the Mirage. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. I've always been a fan of theirs, but
love Brandon.
Yeah, this record, I don't know if you've heard it. They've always kind of flirted with like Americana and kind of being like a new wave Springsteen, and they nailed it. This one is like, it's just 40 minutes. It's what I need right now. It's like all these amazing anthems, and his songwriting it's like new wave Springsteen. It's just fantastic.
That's a great way to describe it. I guess that's why you're a music writer.
It's also produced by Flood and Alan Moulder, who are two incredible alternative rock producers. They did like Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream and Melancholy and Infinite Sadness, and I think they did Closer. So it's just like you have these master mixers. It sounds incredible, and it's all these anthems. And again, just right now in the world, it's very uplifting, and I'm obsessed with it. So I've been listening to that a lot.
All right. So my last question for each of you. Again, something I like to always ask the authors is just tell us what you're working on right now. Anthony, I'm going to start with you on this one because I want to say when I was kind of doing my research on these guys, I stumbled across a really fantastic podcast that Anthony does, and it's about two of my favorite things in the world, wine and vinyl, and it's naturally called Winyl. And so here's what I love about it. So he's talking with like one musician or band or group or that kind of stuff, and they're talking about other groups or influences on them. And then what he does is he somehow miraculously pairs those people with a wine. And it's really awesome. So if you love music and talking about music and just kind of geeking out on that kind of stuff, and you like wine, it's perfect. and you can kind of pair the wine with the podcast and the conversation. So I know he said that he's working on the next season of it, which makes me very, very happy. But you can talk a little bit, talk a little bit about that. And then in addition, new books, whatever you're working on, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, obviously I'm a music geek, always have been. And I'm also kind of a wine geek. So Wineal was just a chance to put those together. Like you said, I basically get a guest on and I ask them one of their favorite, like a favorite record or just a record that came to them in a pivotal point in their life that they'll never forget. And then I work with these great wine buyers in California who are giant music geeks too. And we sort of get together and pick the perfect bottle of wine to encapsulate that record. And then I drink it with the artist or whoever my guest is. And we talk about both. Like I talk about the making of the record and a little bit about the wine. And then we have another interview with the wine expert who really gets nerdy on the wine because you know, that's his livelihood.
He's awesome though.
I would just be faking. So it's super fun. I mean, honestly, the pandemic really kind of messed this season up. So I'm going to have a really truncated season coming out in about a month. But the last season was 10 episodes. And, you know, I had like people I've worked with, like Tommy Lee, a lot of other good folks on there. So this one's pretty cool. And it should be coming out in about month and a half. My engineer's sort of working on it. Right. And I definitely need Dan on season 3.
Yes.
I'll be there.
Oh, absolutely. You have
like
to.
Once we can get together again, you know, I was sort of stuck because you want to taste wine like normally in a room with someone, not, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. Not over a screen.
Yeah, and I don't want to do that. And then either that or, you know, I'd have to really run some long cables, like be like 15 feet apart. Sipping wine just doesn't seem right either. So I'm using some interviews that were done before all of this happened, and I'm going to put out a shortened season. But next season, Dan, you have to be on it. And I have a sponsor who actually has a great wine shop in Williamsburg, and we have a studio, and we're going to do it there. So that's going to be cool. So I'm working on that. And then the one good thing that happened during quarantine to me is that I got I'm working with Raekwon from Wu-Tang Clan, and I'm doing his autobiography now. And the wonderful, you know, rappers, all musicians can be hard to pin down, just in terms of like literally getting them to sit down and, you know, give the time for interviews. The great thing about this, about not being able to go anywhere, is that Raekwon just wanted to talk to me 6 days a week for a month, and I have like 50 hours of tape.
Wow.
So everything, it is going to be the entire history of the Wu-Tang Clan. He's an amazing story. So I'm currently working on that. I think our official announcement from the publisher goes out like next week. And so
we heard it here first, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, you did. The official one's going to drop next week. And I have 2 other things that are like, I have collaborations to work with 2 people. But I shouldn't say anything because the books haven't been sold yet. So one is a comedian and one is a pop star. So
nice.
Hopefully that'll be happening next year.
All right, Dan, what you got in the works?
Oh, what an unproductive pandemic it has been for me. Not as much as I should is the answer. I just had a piece come out in the New Yorker, on the New Yorker's website about creative growth, which is an arts center in Oakland that is for disabled artists. And it's about how they weathered the pandemic when no one could go to their studio and their 150 artists were kind of forced to fend for themselves. I'll also have essays coming out in the New York Review of Books and the London Review of Books soon. One of them is a review of a book about architecture, and the other is a review of a book that is a history of the New York accent, which I think is a really great book, actually. And I have started to work on what is supposed to be an audiobook original with David Byrne of Talking Heads fame. But it is still not, it's also kind of in contractual obligations and stuff. So it's not exactly a surefire thing, but I really hope it happens because I've loved talking to him so far. And I'm trying to start working on a novel, but I have not gotten very far. So I wouldn't be surprised if it never happens. But
would that be your first fiction?
Yeah, it would
Ever?
be. Yeah, it would be.
Cool.
Yeah.
We all have those. Don't feel bad.
I know. Yeah.
I've got a couple.
It's so tough.
It is.
Yeah, I've got one in a drawer already from 10 years ago, and I was like, well, it's been a decade, probably time to give it another go.
I'm with you,
so
buddy.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, and I'm also kind of reaching towards starting a sequel to Chaos with Tom O'Neill, with who I co-wrote that book with. So he's got a lot more reporting that has never been given its proper due, and we're going to see if we can turn that into a book of some kind. So,
well, cool. Well, I mean, I have to say I will look forward to anything that you guys do. I loved these books so much. Love your work. So very appreciative of you for creating these works of art and putting them out there for us, and then also for being here with us this evening. So thank you so much for doing this with us and for adapting to all this kind of virtual fest and everything. Really means a lot. We appreciate you being here for us. I do want to say to the audience and everyone out there, this is where, if you have ever been to any of my sessions in real life, this is where I say the same thing over and over and over, and I'll say it all the time, every day. Support writers, support the arts, buy books, support your library. Give money to the library. If you check them out, turn them in late so that you have to pay huge fines like I do. That's how I donate to the library. But just support literature and art and writing, and keep these guys putting out this kind of amazing stuff, and keep supporting books and what the Central Arkansas Library System does, and all the good that is put out there into the world because of the library system and these books and authors like Dan and Anthony. So I just want to say, because I always say buy books, you can buy these books. Some of them have been already signed through the Six Bridges Book Festival website. It's simply sixbridgesbookfestival.org. Our book partner in selling these books is Wordsworth Books, which is an amazing small local independent bookstore here in Little Rock, up in the Heights. If you've never been there, go stop by. I was in there the other day. It's just the coolest place. In fact, my teenage son went in there the other day. He had to get a book for school, and he came out and he said, if I actually liked reading, this would be a super cool place to hang out. What are you gonna do?
Well,
But so Wordsworth,
Can't win them all.
Yeah, no. But like you said, he's picked up the Eminem book. He's kind of into this. So,
nice.
But so Wordsworth is fantastic. They're our book selling partner for this, so you can stop in the store. They've got all of the Book Fest books in there for sale. You can purchase them, again, like I said, through the Six Bridges Book Festival website, through Wordsworth website. But this is not the end of the fest, since this is only the beginning. One of the benefits of going virtual is that we've now got, instead of just kind of a long weekend, we're able to do this for almost 2 weeks. We've got a lot of amazing sessions coming up. So again, visit sixbridgesbookfestival.org to see all the different events, and you can register for a lot of amazing sessions. We've got books and authors and sessions about a wide variety of topics. So don't let tonight be your only session. Go ahead and check some of those out and register for some other ones. There's a little bit of something there for everybody, even kids. For example, we got kids yoga in the morning. So check us out, buy these books, support these authors, support your library system. And again, guys, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. This has been one of, if not the most fun sessions I've done in all my years of doing this. So Thanks for making it awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was so fun.
Everybody have a good night. Have a great weekend.
Night.
Have a great fest.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.